Hey everyone, and welcome back. You know I love those aha moments, those times when something just clicks and you see the world in a whole new light.
Yeah, those are the best.
Well, get ready for a whole bunch of those because today we are diving deep, and I mean deep, into Malcolm Gladwell's Revenge of the Tipping Point,
Oh, this is a good one. It's Gladwell, so you know you're in for a wild ride.
for sure. Okay, so for anyone who hasn't read The Tipping Point, and seriously, add it to your list if you haven't,
Yeah.
Gladwell talks about those pivotal moments when something small, seemingly insignificant, can spark a massive change.
Right, like those things that go viral, a song, a product, an idea.
Exactly. Or, on a slightly less awesome note, how a few broken windows in a neighborhood can actually lead to a spike in crime.
Yeah, that's the thing about tipping points that can be positive or negative. And in this new book, Gladwell's kind of saying, hold on a sec, there's more to the story. He's revisiting tipping points, but this time, he's shining a light on those unintended consequences.
Okay, unintended consequences. Like what? Give me an example.
Well, he kicks things off with a story that'll make your jaw drop. We're talking a bank robbery epidemic in 1990s Los Angeles. But here's the kicker. It wasn't some big, organized crime syndicate behind it all.
Oh, really?
It was all orchestrated by one mastermind. They called him Casper.
Casper. That's not a very intimidating name for a criminal mastermind.
Right. But this Casper pulled off 175 bank robberies in just 4 years.
Wait, 175? That's like, what, a robbery every week?
Pretty much. And this is a perfect example of what Gladwell calls the law of the few. It's this idea that a small group of people, the right people, can have a massive impact, way bigger than you might expect.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how does one person, even a really strategic one, pull off 175 bank robberies?
Well, it's all about connections, influence, understanding those tipping points. Think about how one viral video can make a product explode in popularity overnight. Same principle at work here, just, with bank robberies instead of the latest TikTok trend.
Wow, okay, so one person, the right connections, the right strategy, and boom, a whole city is dealing with a bank robbery epidemic.
And it highlights how interconnected everything really is. But hold on, because it gets even more intriguing. From bank robberies in LA, Gladwell takes us all the way to, wait for it, Vermont. Yeah, Vermont. He wants to talk about healthcare spending in Vermont.
Okay, now that feels like a hard left turn.
Yeah.
What do bank robberies in LA have to do with healthcare spending in Vermont?
It all comes back to those unintended consequences, those ripple effects we were talking about. And what Gladwell uncovers about healthcare in Vermont is definitely a ripple effect.
Okay, I'm listening.
You see, when it comes to certain medical procedures, your likelihood of undergoing one often has less to do with your own health or medical history,
Wait, seriously?
and more to do with where your doctor happens to live.
So you're telling me my zip code could influence whether I get a specific surgery? That's a little unnerving.
It is a bit, isn't it? Gladwell calls this small area variation. Basically, it's this phenomenon where the norms and practices of a particular place have this, gravitational pull on our choices and behaviors. And we're often totally unaware of it.
It's like these places have an invisible force field,
Yeah.
shaping our decisions without us even realizing it.
That's a great way to put it. And to really drive this point home, Gladwell brings up another really interesting example: vaccination rates at Waldorf schools.
Oh, right. He talks about how these schools consistently have much lower vaccination rates
Yeah.
than surrounding areas. And it's not about demographics. It's like their own little microculture is influencing those decisions.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really crucial point. Our environment, our place, it plays a huge role in shaping our actions, often in ways we don't even consciously recognize.
Okay, so we've got bank robbery masterminds, healthcare discrepancies, and vaccination choices, all connected by this idea of unintended consequences and the power of place. Gladwell knows how to weave a tapestry, that's for sure.
He's a master storyteller. But get this. If you think that's wild, hold on to your hats, because Gladwell then takes us on a deep dive into the perils of monoculture. And to illustrate this, he starts with something you might not expect: cheetahs.
Cheetahs. Okay, I have to admit, I was not expecting that. What do cheetahs have to do with tipping points?
Well, Gladwell uses cheetahs as a starting point to talk about the fragility of monocultures. See, cheetahs have this incredibly low genetic diversity, which, yeah, on the one hand makes them super fast, but on the other hand, it makes them really vulnerable to disease. Like, one virus could come along and wipe out a whole population.
Oh, wow. So it's like strength in numbers, but in a genetic diversity kind of way.
Exactly. And here's where Gladwell connects this to humans. He talks about this affluent town called Poplar Grove, picture-perfect houses, top-notch schools, the whole 9 yards. It was designed to be the place to raise a family.
Sounds idyllic. What could possibly go wrong in a place like that?
Well, and this is the thing about tipping points sometimes. Even the best intentions can have unintended consequences. And Gladwell shows how this quest for perfection, this drive to create this ideal community, actually led to a monoculture. Everyone striving for the same things, the same kind of success, and the pressure, it was intense.
And that's where those unintended consequences come back to bite. Right?
Exactly. Sadly, Poplar Grove saw this surge in teen
Oh,
suicides.
wow.
This community, this place designed to be a haven for families, became, in a way, a pressure cooker.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. It's a tragic example of how fragile monocultures can be. How even when we try to create the perfect environment, we can miss these crucial elements of human experience.
Like diversity and resilience.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
It makes you think about all these invisible forces that shape our lives, often in ways we don't even realize.
It does, and it ties into another fascinating point Gladwell makes about tipping points, that we can actually influence them, even engineer them to a certain extent. And he starts off this whole discussion with corporate boardrooms, of all things, and gender dynamics.
Okay, now my curiosity is officially piqued. How do corporate boardrooms and gender dynamics connect to tipping points?
So Gladwell points to this research showing that having at least 3 women on a board, he actually calls it the magic third, can dramatically change how the whole group functions, how decisions are made.
The magic third. I like that. It's like a tipping point for inclusion.
Exactly. And this idea of the magic third gets us into this whole concept of social engineering.
Social engineering.
Yeah.
Like manipulating tipping points on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. This is where groups, institutions, they're subtly or sometimes not so subtly manipulating those tipping points to get a desired outcome. We see it everywhere. Advertising, marketing, politics, you name it, it's probably happening.
Okay, see, now this is where things get a little tricky for me. Influencing change for the better, that makes sense. But manipulation, that's a whole other ballgame. Where do we draw the line?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something Gladwell really wants us to grapple with.
So how do we grapple with it? I mean, where do we even start?
Well, Gladwell takes us back in time for a bit, and this time he wants to unpack how America woke up to the Holocaust.
The Holocaust, wow. That seems like heavy, heavy territory for a book about tipping points.
And yet it fits perfectly. You see, for a long time, the Holocaust wasn't something that people really talked about openly. It was this horrific event, but it wasn't part of the national conversation.
Right, it was this horrific event that people kind of, I don't know, maybe tried to forget about.
In a way, yeah. And then, 1978, everything changed.
1978, what happened in 78?
That was the year the miniseries Holocaust aired on NBC, the one with Meryl Streep.
Oh, right. I vaguely remember my parents watching it, but I was pretty young then. What does a TV show, even one with Meryl Streep, have to do with a shift in national consciousness?
This, my friend, is a case study in how a single cultural event, in this case a TV show, can totally rewrite the narrative. You see, millions of Americans were glued to their screens watching this drama unfold, and suddenly, the Holocaust wasn't this abstract historical event anymore.
Right, it became real.
It became real, it became personal, and it was impossible to ignore.
It's hard to imagine something like that happening today with social media and streaming services and everything so fragmented. But back then, everyone was watching the same thing at the same time.
Exactly. And it sparked a national conversation, a reckoning even. And Gladwell argues that this miniseries, as powerful as it was just the tipping point. It unleashed this wave of change that had been building for years.
So it's like all these different factors were aligning, and then boom, that miniseries was the catalyst that brought it all together.
Exactly. More people were talking about their experiences, books and documentaries were being made, museums were being built. It was a cultural shift of seismic proportions.
Wow. So a TV show, the right story at the right time, ignited this incredible change. It's amazing.
It really is. But as we delve deeper into Revenge of the Tipping Point, we're going to see that not all tipping points are created equal, and sometimes those unintended consequences, well, they can have some pretty devastating ripple effects.
Okay, bring on those ripple effects. But I gotta say, those unintended consequences have me a little, I don't know, nervous. What other surprises does Gladwell have up his sleeve?
Well, to really, I guess, drive home the complexity of these tipping points, Gladwell brings it back around to something that's touched so many lives, the opioid crisis.
Yeah, the opioid crisis is, well, it's devastating. It's touched a lot of lives, mine included.
It really is. And Gladwell, he doesn't shy away from the tough questions here. Like, he really digs into the role of Purdue Pharma, the company behind OxyContin.
Right, Purdue Pharma.
And remember we were talking about social engineering earlier?
Yeah, the magic third and all that.
Right. Well, Gladwell unpacks how Purdue Pharma went all out with this really aggressive marketing campaign targeting doctors, giving out gifts, trips, you name it. And their message was all about how OxyContin was safe, effective, and get this, not addictive.
Which we all know now is, well, it's just not true.
Yeah, incredibly misleading. And this is where that small area variation thing comes back into play, remember? That idea about how where you live can influence your health care.
Oh, right, right.
Gladwell points out that different states had different regulations about prescribing opioids.
So some states were stricter and others were more, I don't know, lenient.
Exactly. And Purdue Pharma, well, they knew exactly which states to target, the ones with those looser regulations.
Wow.
It's a pretty chilling example of how companies can exploit those small area variations to make a profit, even if it puts people at risk.
Yeah, it's a really stark reminder that those tipping points, those moments of change, they can be manipulated. And not always for good. But what do you even do about something this big? I mean, we're talking about healthcare and addiction. It feels so huge.
It is huge. And Gladwell, he adds another layer to it. He talks about how Purdue Pharma actually ended up reformulating OxyContin.
Oh, right, to make it harder to abuse.
Yeah, exactly. They made it harder to crush and snort, which had been, a really common way to abuse it. So on the surface, a good move,
While
right?
trying to make it less addictive, less dangerous.
Right, and here come those unintended consequences rearing their ugly heads again, that reformulation may have actually fueled a different problem.
Oh, no. You mean like people turning to even harder drugs?
Exactly. People who were already addicted, they still needed their fix. And with OxyContin harder to abuse, they turned to even riskier alternatives, like heroin, fentanyl.
Wow. So trying to solve one problem actually made another one worse.
Yeah.
It just makes you realize how interconnected everything is.
Absolutely. And it highlights how we need a much more systemic approach, looking at all the interconnected factors. It's not enough to just address one piece of the puzzle.
Okay, wow. I'm seeing unintended consequences everywhere now.
Yeah.
So how does Gladwell wrap up this roller coaster of a book? Does he offer any solutions, or are we, doomed to repeat these patterns?
Well, he does leave us with, I think, a glimmer of hope. And he does it by, get this, circling back to the Holocaust.
Okay, this is the second time he's brought up the Holocaust.
Yeah.
What's the connection this time?
This time, it's less about the tragedy itself and more about, I think, resilience. You see, Gladwell tells this story about a group of Holocaust survivors in Los Angeles. And back in the 1970s, they had this really, really tough dilemma. They had all these mementos, photographs, letters, things from the camps. But, they couldn't bear to keep those objects in their homes.
Oh, I can't even imagine. Those objects must have held so much pain, so much trauma.
Exactly. And so they had this idea, a museum, just a small room, actually, off Wilshire Boulevard, a place where they could keep these objects safe, create a space for remembrance, but also, I think, for a kind of collective healing.
Wow. That's really powerful, a testament to the human spirit, to find hope, even in the face of such unimaginable suffering.
It really is. And what's remarkable is this was all happening when the Holocaust was still very much a taboo subject in America.
This is before the miniseries.
Exactly. Most Americans, they just didn't talk about it. And then that miniseries aired in '78.
And boom, everything changed.
Exactly. And suddenly people were ready to listen, to remember, to learn. And this tiny museum, this little room started by survivors, well, it became the seed for what is now the Holocaust Museum, LA.
Wow. That is incredible. It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's hope. There's always that tipping point, that moment when things can shift, when things can change for the better.
And that's really the note Gladwell leaves us with. He reminds us that we're not just bystanders in this whole tipping point phenomenon. We have agency.
We have the power to make a difference.
Exactly. We can be the ones who spark positive change, who nudge the world in a better direction.
I love that. Okay, so big picture, what's the takeaway here? What are we supposed to do with all this information? about tipping points, intended or otherwise.
That's the question, isn't it? Gladwell, he asks us to consider this. In a world that's increasingly shaped by these like invisible thresholds, these moments where things can go one way or the other, how can we be more aware of them? And more importantly, how can we use that awareness to create the future we want to see?
It's a powerful question, and one I think we all need to be asking ourselves, right? Because it's not enough to just understand how tipping points work. We have to actually be participants in the process, mindful of our choices and how they might ripple outward.
Exactly. And remember, even small actions can have a huge impact. Never underestimate your ability to be a force for good, to be that catalyst for positive change in your own life and in the world around you.
Boom. I love that. Such a good reminder. Okay, listeners, that was Revenge of the Tipping Point. Go check it out and let us know what you think. Until next time, keep those aha moments coming.